Natural disasters and environmental degradation, a major driver of forced displacement. Natural disasters have long been one of the most immediate and visible causes of forced displacement. Earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, typhoons, and wildfires strike without warning, tearing through communities and destroying homes, infrastructure, and lives in a matter of hours. These events trigger mass evacuations, often displacing thousands, sometimes millions, within very short periods. Displacement caused by such events is not merely about physical safety. The destruction of homes, schools, hospitals, and livelihoods also dismantles the social and economic fabric of affected communities. Access to clean water, healthcare, and food becomes scarce. Emergency shelters are overwhelmed. Families are often split apart. In many cases, people cannot return home for months or even years, if at all. One prominent example is the Philippines, a country highly vulnerable due to its location along the Pacific Ring of Fire and within the typhoon belt. In 2022 alone, the country recorded the highest number of disaster-induced internal displacements in East Asia and the Pacific. 5.4 million people were forced to flee their homes due to typhoons, flooding, and volcanic activity. Year after year, communities are struck again before they have had time to recover from previous disasters, leading to chronic instability. Similarly, in earthquake-prone regions such as Turkey, Nepal, and Haiti, the combination of poor infrastructure and high population density has often resulted in catastrophic damage. The 2010 earthquake in Haiti displaced over 1.5 million people, many of whom remained in temporary camps for years, vulnerable to disease and violence. In the United States and the Caribbean, powerful hurricanes like Katrina, 2005, Maria, 2017, and Dorian, 2019, led to massive displacements, especially impacting already marginalized communities. Wildfires in California and Australia have also caused record-breaking evacuations in recent years. These sudden events are often compounded by inadequate disaster preparedness, fragile housing conditions, and delayed government response. Although attention often fades quickly, the displacement caused by natural disasters leaves long-term scars on both land and lives. While sudden natural disasters like typhoons and earthquakes dominate headlines with their dramatic impact, they represent only one side of the environmental displacement crisis. Beyond the storms and tremors lies a quieter, more enduring threat: the slow and steady degradation of the environment. In these cases, displacement does not come as a reaction to one catastrophic event, but as a response to years, even decades, of worsening conditions. Deserts slowly expand, coastlines erode, crops fail repeatedly, and fresh water becomes increasingly scarce. Livelihoods vanish, hunger grows, and eventually, people have no choice but to leave, not because they are running from an explosion or flood, but because life is no longer sustainable. This second, slower form of displacement reveals how climate change acts as a threat multiplier, worsening existing vulnerabilities and triggering crises where none existed before. It demands a different kind of attention, not one of emergency aid alone, but of long-term planning, international cooperation, and climate justice. When we think of why people are forced to flee their homes, war and violence often come to mind first. But increasingly, the planet itself is becoming uninhabitable for many. Every year, millions of people are displaced, not because of bullets or bombs, but because of floods, droughts, and rising seas. These environmental threats are not abstract. They are immediate, devastating, and often irreversible. Natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and wildfires have long been known to cause sudden and large-scale displacement. Entire communities can be uprooted within hours, often with little time to prepare or recover. People leave not only because their homes are destroyed, but also because basic services like clean water, healthcare, and shelter become unavailable. However, environmental degradation is becoming an equally powerful and more long-term driver of displacement. This refers to the slow deterioration of the environment due to human activity or climate change, such as desertification, deforestation, coastal erosion, or the depletion of natural resources like water and arable land. These issues are especially severe in regions that are already facing poverty or political instability. Climate change acts as a threat multiplier. Rising sea levels are already threatening the habitability of low-lying countries, particularly small island nations in the Pacific, such as Kiribati and Tuvalu. In the Sahel region of Africa, prolonged droughts are contributing to food and water insecurity, forcing families to leave their homes in search of survival. In South Asia, flooding in Bangladesh is making large rural areas unlivable for long periods of the year. These environmental pressures don't just displace individuals temporarily, they can lead to the permanent loss of homes, ancestral land, and even cultural identity. People may never be able to return, especially if entire regions are submerged or become desertified. In this way, environmental displacement is not just a humanitarian crisis. It is also a justice issue, as the people most affected are often the least responsible for the emissions and policies that drive climate change. Yet despite the growing urgency, those displaced by environmental causes are often not recognized as refugees under current international law. The 1951 Refugee Convention does not include climate or environmental factors in its definition, leaving millions without formal protection. This legal gap presents one of the most urgent challenges for international advocacy and policy reform today. The case study on the rising tide of climate-induced migration environmental degradation, fueled by climate change and unsustainable development, is becoming an increasingly powerful driver of forced migration. These pressures, in contrast to abrupt disasters, manifest gradually, sometimes imperceptibly, until areas become uninhabitable. In Pacific Island, nations such as Tuvalu and Kiribati, we investigate. Kiribati, located in the Central Pacific, Kiribati is made up of 32 low-lying atolls and one raised island. With the highest points only a few meters above sea level, rising oceans pose an existential threat. Saltwater intrusion has contaminated freshwater supplies and agricultural land, making life increasingly difficult. Kiribati's government has adopted a forward-thinking strategy called Migration with Dignity, securing agreements with countries like New Zealand to allow phased, legal migration while preserving cultural identity. Next, Tuvalu, another low-lying island nation, faces similar threats. Projections indicate that much of Tuvalu could be submerged by 2050. In response, Tuvalu signed a migration treaty with Australia that offers permanent residency to 280 Tuvaluans each year. This agreement provides a lifeline, but also highlights the painful reality. People are preparing to leave their entire country behind. Next is the Sahel, drought and desertification, stretching across countries like Mali, Niger, and Chad. The Sahel region faces accelerating desertification and recurring droughts. Climate change has intensified water scarcity and disrupted agriculture and pastoral livelihoods. As grazing lands vanish and crops fail, communities are driven to migrate in search of survival. These movements are complicated by political instability and armed conflict in the region, making safe relocation even more difficult. Bangladesh, home to one of the world's most densely populated river deltas, is highly vulnerable to climate-related displacement. Frequent and intensified flooding caused by rising sea levels and glacial melt from the Himalayas has led to repeated displacement. In 2019 alone, over 4.1 million people were displaced by climate-related disasters. Long-term projections suggest that up to 13.3 million people could be internally displaced by 2050, making this a slow-burning crisis with massive humanitarian implications. Next is the Philippines. Already discussed under sudden disasters, the Philippines also faces long-term environmental degradation. In addition to typhoons, coastal erosion and rising sea levels are eating away at farmlands and fishing communities. As these slow changes accumulate, traditional livelihoods disappear, pushing people into urban slums or forcing migration abroad. It's a dual crisis. Sudden disasters shock the system, while long-term degradation ensures people can never fully recover. One of the most pressing challenges of climate-induced displacement is the legal protection gap. The 1951 Refugee Convention does not include environmental causes as grounds for refugee status. As a result, those fleeing climate impacts often do not qualify for asylum or international protection, even when their displacement is involuntary and life-threatening. Without formal legal recognition, climate-displaced people face barriers in accessing basic rights, housing, healthcare, education, and legal status. This leaves millions vulnerable, especially in regions where climate stress intersects with poverty, inequality, and political fragility. This growing category of displaced persons, climate migrants, exists in a legal limbo. Unlike traditional refugees, they have no recognized status under international law. Their plight raises urgent questions about justice, responsibility, and the need for new frameworks that account for environmental realities.